What's up guys, Leland here for Bottom Table Tyrants, and we have our third video of GM Roundtable, and we have some more great questions to ask them, so let's get to it.
It is okay for the GM to not know the rules. It is not okay for the GM to not admit that they don't know the rules. It is okay to say, I don't know how that works, or I'm unsure, or where did you get that +2 from? And everyone takes 5 seconds to pull out the book and look it up real quick so that you can all be on the same page. It harkens back to that rule of cool of, if you set the precedent now, then that is how the rest of the campaign is going to go. And the rules are there to help guide you through the math of the system. And the math of the system is the least interesting, but one of the more important parts. It's perfectly okay for the players to not know the rules. It is not okay for the players to not know the rules after 9 sessions.
It is definitely okay to not know all the rules as a GM. I don't know how on earth you'd have to be a full-time GM. I mean, I can't retain a bunch of information all at once. So, yeah, that's fine. Just make note of it for future reference. And the players, definitely not. They don't need to remember all the rules. In fact, that's new player coming in. I'm like, I'll already have your character sheet. Sit down. We'll just start role-playing it out. And I'll tell you what to roll.
I think as long as you have a basic understanding of the rules, that's the main thing, as long as your players are okay with that. I didn't realize what I was doing, but at the very beginning when I started GMing, I was very much saying, hey, I don't know these rules that well, but are you guys okay with that? I didn't realize I was even doing session 0, like baselining, and that's what I was doing. And it worked out really well because you get a lot more forgiveness and acceptance from your players. And if you're not getting that, that's a different conversation, different problem.
If you know all the rules, you have other things you need to worry about for your life.
I had this happen in a campaign where our barbarian loves to roleplay. The player loves to roleplay. He will get into goofy situations. He'll do goofy things himself. He's lovable and likable and plays very charismatic characters, and it's a lot of fun to be around. But when it comes to combat, it was, I walk over here, I hit thing with big hammer. And his party was suffering because he didn't know how to play defensively, he didn't know how to rage, he didn't know how to do anything that a barbarian does in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. So, after a couple weeks of my players making fun of this player for not knowing the rules, we had a session where I gave every one of the players a specific thing that they were going to do, and then we all got in an arena, and I had my players beat up on that barbarian, and everyone had that specific thing that they were to do that would make him look up something in the barbarian sheet and figure out how to survive or how to retaliate or how to get past that thing that they were doing to him. And it had him finally look up all the rules for his barbarian. And after that, it wasn't an issue. He started to be immune to charm and fear while he was raging. And he started to take half damage from blunt and slashing and piercing damage. If you can solve a problem in-game, it's so much better than solving it at the table with real human beings.
That's one of those that I got into a little bit of trouble, because what I realized was the players started depending on me to know most of their things. And what I did was I gave them a grace period. And I told them, especially if they're a new player, I'm like, look, I'll know most of your stuff until probably level 5 or something like that. But then it is your responsibility. And if you forget to do something, that is now on you. I am not going to prompt you. I'm not going to remind you or any of those other things that were very helpful before. And what I noticed is when they got to level 3 or 4, they started very much more paying attention to things, so that when that did happen, they could then go, oh, I should be doing this as a bonus action to help myself.
If every single turn a player has to look up what their quarterstaff does, or what spells they have to go into the book and look at what the spell is every single time, it goes back to it. It's slowing the pace of things, and they basically don't know what they want to do, and they're trying to find something to do if they're not familiar with the rules or it goes back to the lack of commitment on the part of the player. So there's definitely a point where it becomes an inhibitor on the side of the players.
I love it. I've started doing that recently, and it blew one of the other GMs. It blew his mind because I made players roll for their own saving throws, for mine, for all sorts of stuff. I had a session of 5e where I rolled dice 3 times, and that's it. I think it's great, and it puts more drama in your game.
I think it's important to know what the effect of not rolling a dice has on your player. Because at the end of the day, the GM behind the screen with all your notes and laptops and dice and cards and things like that, you're the stagehands behind stage on a play. You're the one that are pulling the ropes to make Peter Pan fly. You're the one that are switching the front of the decorations to the back of the decorations so that now you're in a forest instead of a tavern. All of that is to affect the experience of everyone that is engaging with you. So if you're not rolling a dice for an attack and you're saying, okay, they just hit you, that if that's an initiative, that's real dirty, right? Because now it's not fair. Now it's just, I'm beating up on you because I run the game and I can do that.
That takes away the fun of it. Where my style, I like to have them, I've transitioned to this now where I'll roll in front of all the players, where if it's a competitive roll or they're rolling off, like it becomes much more exciting, and then it goes back to almost tell the story after you roll the dice. So it's like, oh yeah, say they want to kick in a door, but it's like, oh, we're going to kick in the door, and you roll the dice. And then based on what the dice says will dictate what the next part of the story is. So I'm very skeptical of any RPG that doesn't involve dice.
If you're in a situation where you're not in initiative and you're doing a role play back and forth and things get heated and your bartender slaps the player's character, then you don't have to roll the dice. But if that player slaps the bartender back, they don't have to roll the dice either. Because now we're in role play rules, and now we're into, this is just a heated moment.
I would have to hear a better argument to not use a dice, because I definitely think they should use a dice. Because, I don't know. Then it's up to the GM's discretion if something hits me, or if I hit something. Nah.
There are things that I have started to take, I think I got this from Reddit, is no one at my table is allowed to roll insight anymore. If they want to make an insight check, they tell me what their modifier is and I roll it. Because insight in 5th edition turns into a lie detector. And if you roll really well and I say, oh yeah, you know he's lying, then you know he's lying. If you roll really poorly and I say, you think he's telling the truth, you know he's lying. It's like, why even make that roll? Mm-hmm. So they give me their modifier, I roll behind the screen, and then they get to hear what the result is. It's important to know that just because you're rolling a dice behind the screen doesn't mean that the result of that dice needs to be what happens. And I would much rather the players think that the dice are making them win or making them lose, and I'm actually controlling and pulling those strings, than not roll the dice and make them think that I'm being too mean or I'm giving them a free win. They need to feel like they're earning those victories, or they need to feel like they need to really buckle down and try because they're about to be defeated. And even just that clack of a dice hitting the table behind that screen can be enough to change that mental attunement for them. In the cult system, for example, the bad guys don't have a turn in combat in the cult system. It's a horror system, and the bad guys can't take action. It's very, very weird. It's very counterintuitive. But what the bad guys can do is act when the players do badly. So if a player tries to take an action and they roll badly, that gives the bad guys their opportunity to hit or attack or shoot or whatever the case may be. It's very interesting. It puts a lot of the stress back on the player.
No, I sound like that. I'm like, ooh, I like
Yeah.
that. Like that's a better way to do it than you not roll at all. But like when you roll the 3,
Yep.
guess what? You just got hit.
I took Death Watch, all of the names, all the lore, and I ported it over to Starfinder because I wanted to find a system that was a lot cleaner. The end result was, I love the 40k lore, I like the Starfinder system, and just not being afraid to jam it all together and see what happens. There's a lot of like play a session, then have feedback, and like, okay, I gotta tweak these rules, I gotta figure this thing out. And how does a Force Sword work, and Starfinder, how do psychic tests work, and things like that. But it was just, it had a good group that was willing to provide that feedback and be interested in playing a better game.
I love the mechanic in 10 Candles where at any time a player can choose to, and they also have the same kind of mechanic in Dread. They can choose to fail, but it's not really failing. It's like you're going to go out a hero. This is like your heroic last stand, or you basically get to take control of the narrative for yourself. And the GM cannot do that. And I think it puts a lot of good emphasis on both storytelling and agency, and it puts it right back where it belongs, which is in the player's hands.
There's table rules that I have, or I guess house rules that I have. If you drink a potion, it's a bonus action. If you administer a potion, it's an actual action. That way they can just kind of top themselves off on the go, and it makes for a little bit more interesting combat.
I would say World of Warcraft. I know it's not the board game, but at least the idea of mechanics in a fight. I got that from World of Warcraft to make sure fights have some flavor to them. I tried to. No, just not always successful, but
Like, I don't care about food. Food should be a role play thing. It shouldn't be a mechanic thing. Travel. I don't even really play with exhaustion, really. If you travel for a while, find a place to rest, find a place to lay down and chill out for a little bit and do that. Just because my group is not a group that really enjoys that nitty gritty. Some groups love that. Some groups love getting into the spreadsheet aspect of these role-playing games. And if you have a group like that, play into those things. People really enjoy that.
at the end of the session, let them rot the entire time. I mean, sometimes if they're close to something, sure, yeah, and if they're starting to give up, yeah, you kind of have no choice. But I mean, if they're actually trying and they're really close, maybe a little piece here and there, some crumbs, but then towards the end, make them earn it. And I've experienced that. Because at the end of it, when it's 3 hours in and they finally figure it out, then it's somewhat of you can tell it was rewarding.
Yeah.
At least the experience I had with it.
I think the most important part of helping players along when they get stuck is that you only do it in game. It's important to be patient. Make sure they're actually stuck. Make sure you look around the table and see people like, oh, I don't know. And they stop looking at the map, or they stop looking at the minis, or they stop looking at their character sheet for things that they can do. Once you start seeing that happen, I find it's super important that things change in game. And that's sort of set on this precedent. I don't know if it's in the rules or if it's something that I have where I make a perception check, I don't notice the thing. I'm not allowed to make a perception check again about that thing unless something in the environment changes that I could then make a different perception check about. Otherwise, people are just going to sit there and roll insight until they hit a nat 20 and get all the answers. That's when that NPC from 2 sessions ago walks in surprisingly, or that's when the storm that's raging outside, suddenly lightning crashes and something falls, and now their direction is turned towards this chandelier that just crashed to the ground. And oh, by the way, while you're looking at that chandelier, you notice this thing just behind it.
I think that's situational. It just depends. Sometimes it's good for a player to figure something out, and sometimes if they are just totally stuck and you need them to know something, then have a creative way to do it. And if you don't have a creative way, just do it.
It's tricky because it goes back to the challenges I've been dealing with for the last several years of all my, basically the GM game, the game I've been playing as a GM, or running as a GM, where without personality, they're almost all murder hobos. And so to spice things up, it includes puzzles, and it's usually I'll basically make someone who's closest to the answer make a check, and then depending on that goes, try to make it less or more obvious, or if they do something with the puzzle, I can give them a little like, you can just be a little exaggerated, like, well, that seems like a good idea, right? Well, I mean, if you want, and you can just, the context and the tone seems to help, as opposed to just full up hints. So it's not as much fun.
That's it for this week, guys. If you're enjoying this series, please like and consider subscribing. That's it for tonight. Thank you. Leland out.